Welcome one and all to the Ferret and Raccoon podcast, episode 226. I am your one and only host for this podcast, the Angry Raccoon, bringing you the last podcast of September 2023. And it's crazy how fast this month has flown by already, as we're already coming up to October, which obviously, as we usually say when we do discuss things regarding that month, it is the spooky month. So I'm kind of looking forward to it, as we kind of have some things we want to talk about on the next few episodes coming up, but that's for the future. Things have been pretty interesting over the last 2 weeks since the previous episode. It has unfortunately been really warm over here in England. We've been experiencing a sort of heat wave, which has kind of been ugly. I mean, it is September. It's not the kind of weather I expect or want at this time of the year, but at least it seems like it's kind of passing. I'm kind of recording on a very more typical English-based weather where it's like grey and cloudy and quite windy and that, so I'm at least happy that there is no rain right now as I record the podcast. But yeah, didn't really do too much. One of the other things I did do was, obviously I'm going to go on about it again, and that is Crash Team Rumble. It finally had its Season 2 start, which was on the 12th of September, and they came out swinging, which was really awesome. Toys for Bob really delivered with one of the biggest, changes to the game, which hopefully is a permanent thing, being party mode, which essentially is a 4-player co-op mode where you have to do certain challenges working with 3 other people, and it is extremely fun. Like, this makes the game really worth playing, and I hope this has kind of saved the game to some extent. The basic premise of party mode is you do certain challenges where you have to collect things or do things, whether that's running through, I don't know what you call them. It's not really flags, it's sort of check marks. So you're basically running a lap around an existing map. You have one where you have to dig up bones to build a skeleton, another one where you have to light lanterns, or what's the other one I'm trying to remember, or throw ingredients into a pot. It's a great gimmick because you're timed to do so, but you're also given the option of picking up like 5-second, time bonuses in order to, keep the round going, give you guys enough time. So if you're really clever and strategic with it, you could have 3 people gathering the items or doing the main thing while one person runs around collecting time to ensure that you guys get to the next wave. And once you reach, I believe, the 3rd wave or 4th wave, if you're able to collect boss tokens while also completing the main objective, you face off against a boss in that map, and this boss is incredibly challenging and really fun to do. I've only beaten one boss, and I've managed to make it to bosses, I think, 3 times. So it's really fun, and I mean, the roadmap for the game looks incredibly fun so far. We got the Toys for Bob Labs, which is going to cycle through different game modes, which is pretty cool. Right now, I think we have Capture the Flag, which is going on for another day or 2. There's also limited timed events like Team Takedown, 3v3, which sounds interesting, Zap Trap, which was in the previous season, Team Takedown, Womporama, whatever that's going to be, Boss Beatdown, not to mention the fact that we're getting 2 new maps in the next 2 months. We also have like a Halloween event, which they haven't really detailed, but that could be fun in terms of skins and that. A new power-up, which is the Minefield, which they haven't really explained what it is, but it sounds kind of cool. And Ripto from the Spyro series is going to be a playable character, as well as the fact that they are very heavily hinting at the fact that Spyro is going to be added in the game around December. So this is awesome. This is what the game should have started off with, because it was very bare bones. Yes, we got 2 characters and a new map, but the fact that in the next coming, month or 2, we're getting, 2 maps, new character, tons of game modes. This is the kind of thing that is going to keep people coming back. They want to see what's new. They want to see what's going to be fun. Hopefully these new experimental modes stick around and become permanent fixtures, and in a couple months' time, maybe in a year's time, when you're faced with the option of playing this game, you're, just drowning in options, I guess. The other thing I did was I got round to watching Black Mirror Season 6, and as somewhat expected, it was a mess, unfortunately. I've said it once and I'll say it again, ever since Netflix acquired the rights to the series and a lot of the American writers kind of came in to do episodes, the show has not been as great as it was when it was a English production / Channel 4 show. And this season is no exception. The first episode, which is Joan, is awful. has a good premise, but it kind of fumbles it with how it tries to make fun of something. It really doesn't work. The second episode is fine, but it's extremely predictable. It's, I think, one of the only episodes that takes place in England, or at least is very England-leaning, so I guess it gets a pass. The third episode is way too long. It's about an hour and 20 minutes. Aaron Paul is in it, and he does a fantastic job, as well as the other people in the film, but it's nothing special. You can skip it. The fourth episode is downright awful. It is boring. It is not a Black Mirror episode. I don't know what they were smoking when they came up with this episode. And the fifth episode is by far the most interesting, and in my opinion, the best episode, taking place in, I believe, the late 70s, revolving around a woman of Indian, Asian descent, kind of living in England during very difficult times, if you were, let's say, someone of color. And they do some pretty clever things with, I guess, feelings and that, to not spoil too much. But I wouldn't really recommend it personally. Watch the first and second episode. Watch the first and last episode. If anything, it's a bit of a shame for the most part. But then again, that's Netflix for you. But speaking of Netflix, we have the first trailer to talk about, which is going to be for Chicken Run, Dawn of the Nuggets. This is the official teaser trailer for the sequel. And I know this film is, kind of geared more towards like children for the most part, but I think the whole, this time we're breaking into the prison or place, it's a very lazy trope. And I get it, it makes more sense in the context of the film, but I think you could have done something a little bit more different. I mean, it is crazy to think that the original film came out almost 23 years ago. This October the film turns 23. And it's a film I never really liked as a child because it wasn't Wallace and Gromit. I loved Wallace and Gromit, the original short film trilogy, and although I could clearly tell it was from the same people, it wasn't that, so I never really cared for it. But as time went on, I do like it, and I now respect it and see it as one of Aardman Animation's darkest mainstream releases, because everything after that has not been as dark as some of their early stuff. A lot of people don't seem to realize that a lot of it bordered on being almost like experimental and horror related in some very creative ways. I'd highly, highly recommend looking at some of their older films from the, I'm not sure about 80s, from the 80s era, because they've been, around for quite some time. Now, speaking about the film itself, I wonder if this film, based on the title, is going to address the horror that is a chicken nugget. So for those of you who don't know, a chicken nugget is created by taking all the parts of a chicken that we don't eat or don't have any use for, essentially blending it into a paste and creating and coating it in a batter. So yeah, it's pretty gross, and obviously I would be remiss for not saying that not every single person does this when it comes to chicken nuggets. There are chicken nuggets, they are made in more less disgusting ways, but ever since I kind of found out about that over a decade ago, I've never really eaten them, especially from mainstream fast food chains like McDonald's. They seem to be the leaders of that kind of thing, and I think they are the ones who kind of do that. But I mean, the biggest reveal, and the thing that I guess people have kind of had issue with, I don't have a bigger issue with it as much as some other people, because obviously people online are just incredibly stupid and will complain about every little tiny thing, and that is that, the villain from the first film is still alive. So spoilers for a 20-year-old film, which is kind of confusing and, makes this film a bit of a mess in some regards, because sure, it wasn't a confirmed death in the film, but what's confusing people and me is why they look distinctively younger in this film if it's meant to be a sequel. One of the main character clearly addresses the fact that it is that character. It's not as if this is a prequel and they're just not saying it's a prequel. It's an odd choice, because I'm now wondering what's the time gap between films. Granted, it could have been 20 years since the previous films. It could literally have been a month or a year. We really don't know. It's very strange. And I mean, the concept of a chicken nugget itself isn't new, so why it's being presented as something like grand is odd as well, because there's no, this is common in some sense, like a factory that kills animals or is manufacturing, animal-based foods is nothing special. It's the same thing within the first film, so it kind of feels like a weird retread without doing anything. I personally think that basing the film on the discussion regarding free range versus like pasture raised animals would have been a more relevant and interesting topic to discuss, because the chickens, I would imagine, after escaping, are now free range or wild or whatever you want to call it. I don't know if they're still laying eggs or, giving their, whatever to farmers. But I think that'd be pretty interesting. You could have had a discussion started. They could have poked fun at both situations and all that kind of stuff, and, had some, activist, characters kind of come in, humans, we got to save the chickens. I think stuff like that would have been really fun if they'd gone down that route, but, whatever. The animation, as expected, is top tier coming from Aardman. The cast sounds on point. No one sounds like they're phoning it in or how they shouldn't sound, which is great. I mean, just goes to testament to how professional actors are when it comes to, reprising a role after 2 decades for the most part. And, I just love how simple and easy to understand the story is. They got to break into a machine to save chickens or stop chickens from being hurt, straight to the point. And yeah, I mean, the only other negative I have towards this film is, although we don't see much of it, the comedy isn't really working for me. It kind of falls a bit flat, but granted, there was only 3 jokes in the film, and like I said before, it may be more geared towards children, so that's fine. As long as it's a good film, I don't really care. Next trailer we have, another big deal, is going to be The Boy and the Heron. Now, I honestly thought we weren't going to get a trailer for this, because originally Studio Ghibli, who obviously did films like Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke, the list goes on with how many classic, fantastic masterpieces that studio has made, had said that the poster was going to be the only thing we were going to get in terms of information and advertising regarding this film, which I thought was a very bold approach for them to take, adding more mystery to the film, because it is a big deal. It's been a while since we've had a Studio Ghibli film, especially the fact that Hayao Miyazaki has come out of retirement once again to make this film. So, yeah. But I guess now that the film is out, they've just released a trailer, so we have the trailer to talk about. And even still, it doesn't spoil a thing, which I think is awesome. It's exactly how you should do trailers. And it's really interesting, this trailer. It honestly feels like it could be one of their weirder and darker films. This film has a rather creepy and almost unsettling atmosphere and vibe to it, which for a Ghibli film is pretty cool. I do kind of hope that it does go down into some weird and very dark, maybe even upsetting places, given how it's taking place after World War II, I'm assuming, and deals with death. Some of the visuals are straight up strange for the most part, this recurring theme that you see the main character kind of being overwhelmed or surrounded by just animals and things, I mean, I kind of understand maybe what they're going for, but I won't spoil it just in case I know what it is and it ruins it for the film. But it's weird and cool. Even the heron, in this trailer, there's a shot towards it where you see it, and it looks like a straight up demon. It doesn't look like, a normal heron. So I'm very curious as to I'm very curious as to what this film is about. I think this could be a real winner. It is getting an international release very soon. I think it's November, December is when we're getting it. So I can't wait to watch it, because I've never seen a Ghibli film in theaters, not including the Red Turtle. But yeah, next trailer we have, shifting from animation, we're going to go into a horror film, because I almost always talk about them, and that is going to be for Totally Killer, which is yet another horror film being released by Blumhouse Pictures or Studios. I can't remember what they're officially known as. Obviously, they released Megan earlier this year. We still have the Five Nights at Freddy's film to come out, and now we have this, which I think is releasing this year. Who knows? I don't really care. Yeah, the concept is pretty cute for the most part. This girl this girl going back in time to essentially stop a murder from happening. It's cool, but it's just Happy Death Day again, which is very disappointing given how Blumhouse made that film. So they're just kind of banking on the marginal success of that film. There's very little deviation or anything new with this one, other than it takes place in the 80s, or in some sense, this one is a lot less like Groundhog's Day. Yeah, It's trying to be clever with its references to like Back to the Future, which isn't really an accurate comparison other than the fact that she meets her mother in the past. Yeah, and she's not exactly going back to the future, so whatever. And the somewhat thoughtful breaks are fine, as that kind of seems to be a not. I mean, it's basically poking fun at a lot of the classic horror tropes of like, oh, this house looks horrible, you're gonna get killed, and all that kind of stuff. I think is great. As long as it's not like a constant theme or it's the only character's defining feature, that can really work. If you sprinkle it throughout the film, that can. That could be fun, especially for people who, have seen every horror film in that kind of sense. I was wondering, and I'm not sure if it's going to be confirmed or it's implied or whatever, but is the serial killer wearing a Max Headroom mask? Because if so, was Max Headroom like popular enough to like get a Halloween mask? I mean, yeah, he's somewhat iconic, but he's weird. I don't honestly see anyone in the 80s being like, man, I'm going to dress up as Max Headroom for my Halloween party. I don't know. But, and if it's not, it's a kind of a dumb mask for the most part. It just looks like a blonde-haired guy with a smiling face. It looks almost as bad as, once again, the mask that the serial killer used in Happy Death Day, which was just a baby face mask. And he was just in black with a knife. It was really dumb. Yeah, they're trying to go for the whole iconic Michael Myers look, but this ain't it for the most part. It really doesn't work. I think the idea of like her mum like comedically being traumatized by her friends being killed, like 40 decades ago, and her still having like that pent up fear. I think that's a really cool premise, as well as the fact that her mum, back when she was a teenager, was a total bitch, and her friends were so dumb that you honestly just want them to die. It's a really great dynamic, and I really hope that this is an element that they really push when it comes to the film, because I think it's downright fantastic for the most part. But yeah, not too much to say about that film, but I have my hopes for it. Let's shift towards gaming now. Games have been a bit all over the place for the most part. We had a Sony State of Play, as well as a Nintendo Direct, which is the only thing I'm kind of going to mention. Didn't really see too much from either of those things. They literally happened right as I was doing the podcast, so I didn't see everything, and from what I could see from glance, it wasn't anything too interesting for the most part. But the two things that did stand out from the Nintendo Direct was, of course, Princess Peach Showtime, which essentially is going to be a solo adventure with Princess Peach as she's going to a theater, and it gets overrun by these villains. I can't remember, like the Bluesberries or something like that. And she essentially has to save the day with another magical kind of character. Very Mario Odyssey, but in a smaller scale sense, which I really kind of like. And it's a really cool concept for the most part. I was kind of expecting and hoping that this was going to be a sequel to the very underrated, Super Princess Peach, which is on the DS, which is a game where Peach is the hero in that one. And that was cool. You could kind of use her emotions to kind of progress in the world. Cool concept. But I like that this is going to be a solo adventure, and it's just Nintendo being weird and creative, and usually when they do that kind of stuff, they almost always succeed for the most part. Having Peach be the hero in this game, and her in like multiple literal roles, like in stories and whatnot, within a theater setting, was a clever way of giving her powers through costumes without it feeling like forced empowerment or gender specific, because this could easily you could easily have like Luigi dressed as Sherlock Holmes or be like a kung fu master. It works. It doesn't feel like, oh, it's maid princess or it's cooking princess. I know she is not a pastry chef, but she makes a cake or whatever. But the fact that she has a sword and shield very Zora like, and has a combat mode and a kung fu mode, and I'm sure there's going to be so many other modes that they're not going to show off, which I think will be really cool. And that I really like this concept for the most part. I mean, it's fun seeing Peach in these outfits and actually doing something, and once again, just being something just unusual and creative. Like, please, more of this, Nintendo. And the last trailer we have, very small one, is going to be for F-Zero 99, which, I mean, I'm just going to say, this looks awesome. This is essentially a 99-person racing game online this is a dream come true for me, as this looks like just the perfect definition of chaotic fun. It's essentially a battle royale because once you get knocked out, that's it. Last person standing to some extent, and I imagine you're bumping into cars and all that. Someone bumps you into the rails with stranger power and that. It just looks amazing. Like, could you imagine Mario Kart or Crash Team Racing with 99 players on one map? I want to see that someday. And given how powerful video games are, we can do it. If Nintendo can do it with one of their older games, I think you can do it with another game, or I'm pretty sure someone's modded those previously two mentioned games to have more than just I think 12 or 9 players, or whatever the maximum in those games were of racers. I like the strategy behind the Skyway meter, where if you, I think it was like get enough energy or something that you collect, you can essentially use that power to essentially put yourself on a higher platform and kind of get a boost past everyone. I think that's a really cool mechanic. I'd love to see that implemented in other games as well. And yeah, I just kind of wish that Nintendo would kind of give us what we really want, which is either a sequel to the original F-Zero or a sequel to F-Zero GX, which is still one of the fastest, I guess, kart races I've ever seen in my life. I almost can't handle how fast that game is for the most part. But yeah, that's pretty much going to be the podcast. Now, I am neglecting to talk about 2 things as of right now. The reason why I'm not talking about them is because one of them, I want someone who is a big fan of it to come and talk about this, so maybe that will happen, so no promises. And the second one is something that is pretty big that's happened within the world of gaming. Now, I'm not going to say what it is because I will be talking about it next podcast, and hopefully with somebody, but obviously no promises. The reason I'm not talking about it now is because the story or the information has just come out and the situation is still developing. It would be kind of mute of me to talk about it now and then have to talk about it next month when hopefully the situation has resolved or got better or got worse. I want to form my opinions and do all the proper research before I discuss this. So we will have possibly 2 discussions next podcast to talk about because, like I said before, this situation going on in the gaming industry is a very, very big deal. And for those of you listening to this in the future, you can probably look up, what happened in gaming in, September 2023. And you're probably going, oh, yeah, that's what happened. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's going to be it for the podcast. Obviously, we got the video episode. I couldn't really think of anything too relevant regarding this podcast, so I'm going to hit you off with a great track, which I'm sure some of you have already heard or listened to or whatever, and that is going to be A$AP Rocky with RIOT, brackets, Rowdy Pipin'. This is just a banger of a track, just it hits all that, yeah, literally a banger. And the music video is fantastic. It's one of the more patriotic, in terms of America, music videos I've seen. It is just loud and crazy, and yeah, I cannot wait for this album. Hopefully you guys will enjoy this video. I want to thank everyone for listening to this podcast. If you made it this far, I really do appreciate it. Subscribing would be awesome. Liking the podcast would be awesome. All that good stuff, because I really would love to grow the audience for the most part. But yeah, I guess on that note, I will end this podcast like I always do by saying I was the Angry Raccoon, and I will see you on the next podcast.